Is it working? I'm Jesse. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with addiction and maybe a little bit of hard-headedness. It is, I've been voluntold, even though it's a great pleasure to introduce the person that's giving their testimony tonight. You know her as Terry. I know her as Mom. I'm not going to say that on the way out the door coming here tonight, she was trying to escape to the mountains so she didn't have to give it. Like Amy said, it's been a long 7 years. I've known her 36 years, and I just want to say, as one of 6 kids, I in no way, shape, or form contributed to the reason why both my parents are in recovery. That may be a little bit of a lie, but I look forward to hearing it and listening to it with all you tonight, and to just witness, let you guys see how God's worked in her life and how just giving it over to God and giving her family to Jesus has worked and changed in her life. So, Miss Terry.
Wow. Can y'all hear me? Yep. Awesome. Yeah, it took 7 years to get me up here, and I need to pray. Dear Lord, your goodness always makes me emotional. So I ask that you calm my fears and my tears. Let me tell my story to the one that needs to hear it. Thank you, Lord, for bringing me here this time and this place during this lesson. To you, all the glory goes. In your name, I pray. Amen. Hi. My name is Terry, and I am a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with codependency and anger, but I have victory over alcohol. Hey, guys. My early childhood was pretty normal. 2 loving parents, an older sister that I absolutely adored. If anything made us different, it was that, unlike most moms in the 60s who were all stay-at-home moms, my mother worked as a teacher, becoming the first female principal on Fort Bragg. My daddy worked for the Boy Scouts of America. My sister and I were cared for by a nanny that we adored also. Church on Sundays, vacations to the beach and the mountains every year. I was and always have been a daddy's girl. When I was 6, my baby brother was born, and Robin and I had our very own live baby doll. When I was 9, the Scouts sent our family to Germany for 3 years. We traveled all over Europe, and I spent my summers at a Boy Scout camp. Yep, learning to swim, shoot arrows, canoe, all that fun stuff. During this time, my mother began to drink, then my dad. We moved to Miami when we left Europe, and it was during this time that I understood that alcohol had become their way of life. That's probably where my codependency kicked in, because I stepped into the role of caring for my baby brother, cooking, cleaning, and doing whatever else needed to be done. This pattern continued when we moved to Georgia. I started high school there, but alcohol finally cost my dad his job, and we moved back to North Carolina. My mom finally went back to teaching, and my dad went to work for Sears. They both continued to drink. I started smoking when I was 14, as both my parents smoked, and they would even buy my cigarettes. My friends were the party people, and at 15, I began to drink, first on the weekends, then most every day. I met a guy who was 6 years older and fell in love. The summer before my senior year, he was diagnosed with lymphatic cancer, and when he asked if I would get pregnant before his surgery and treatment, I agreed. We had one night to try. I prayed that I would get pregnant, and even went home and told my mom what I had done and that I was praying that it would happen. To which she replied, there wasn't enough alcohol in the world that would get her through that. I can't imagine. God heard my prayers and answered them because I was indeed pregnant. I went through my senior year pregnant, and this was in the 70s. It wasn't that common. I gave birth to my son David a couple of months before graduation. However, I didn't realize I hadn't prayed for that happily ever after with my boyfriend, and he wanted nothing to do with us. I met a GI shortly after he was born, and he had orders for Colorado. I wanted to get away from my parents. We married and moved there, which happened to be his hometown. Keith's family welcomed us, and his family taught me a lot about motherhood. Though Keith liked to smoke marijuana and did so like I smoked my cigarettes, I got pregnant again and gave birth to my daughter Jamie shortly after our first anniversary. I had my tubes tied after she was born. I was done. I was happy, and I loved being in the mountains every weekend. I could put the kids to bed, drink while he got high. This became our life. Then we got orders for Germany. Over there, our patterns pretty much stayed the same, only Keith had discovered hash and became so addicted to it, he began to sell it. This caused a lot of arguments, and our marriage was really strained. Then he got busted for selling drugs, court-martialed, and sentenced to 2 years at Fort Leavenworth. My marriage ended, and the Army sent the kids and I home with no income, no benefits. By this time, my parents had divorced, but their drinking had continued. The kids and I moved in with my mom, and I began to try to build a life on our own. God puts people in your life when you need them, and through our church and the support of my best friend's parents, I began cleaning houses. The money was pretty good, but my drinking continued every night after I put the kids to bed. Soon enough, severe depression set in, and eventually I wound up having to move back in with my mom. I was so angry at my husband for how my life had become. I got a job as a bartender, and my mom watched the kids. This was a great job for someone who loved to drink and had a boss who liked to party after the bars closed. God somehow got me home safely every night, and I could get the kids off to school, sleep, and then repeat. Tensions were really high between my mom and I, two drunk women trying to care for two beautiful children. We both tried to put their needs first, but they deserved so much better. When Keith was released from jail, the court said he had a right to see his kids, so I had to put them on a plane to Colorado. I thought, great, I'll get a couple of weeks vacation and things would be better, except that they weren't. My phone calls to the kids went unanswered, and 2 weeks turned into months. I didn't know where my kids were, and I crawled deeper and deeper into the bottle. I used men and alcohol to numb the pain, a different one every night. It was one of the darkest times of my life, and it was during this time that I met Bob. I told him it was just for one night. He was okay with that. Yeah, that was my plan. God's plan was very different. It wasn't long before we were inseparable. He had a daughter he got on every other weekend, and she helped fill the void in my heart. We started going to church and still trying to locate my kids. And then his wife left the state with his daughter, and we were both going through the same agony. We clung to each other and numbed our pain with alcohol. Even drunk, I would lie in bed and pray that God would send me back my kids. I promised him that I would be the best mom ever if he would let me have them back. After 14 months, I finally got them back when Keith's fiance happened to cross the phone message I had left at his work. She called me, and my kids were on a plane 2 days later. Bob and I met them at the airport during an ice storm, because you know the devil always plays havoc when prayers are being answered. We brought them home, but it didn't take long for us to realize things weren't quite right. We began to hear from Jamie how they had spent most of their time locked in a room, food withheld, and abuse so severe that I can't even describe it here. We got them both into counseling, and the courts revoked Keith's parental rights. but the children I had sent to Colorado were not the ones that came back. Though Jamie would talk about it, David never would. I was devastated and I blamed myself. If you ever heard Bob's testimony, he talks about a night we were both drunk, arguing over who was more sober to drive while we were driving down the road. I grabbed the steering wheel and the truck went up on 2 wheels. But God, He brought the truck back down on all 4 wheels, and I instantly sobered up. You see, we were on our way to pick up my children from the babysitter. That was July 2nd, 1987. That was the last time I ever drank. Bob calls it scared sober. Scared? Oh yeah. Because I realized I'd broken my promise to God. The promise that I would be the best mom if He would send my kids back. This realization scared the mess out of me. I was raised to fear God and His power. And breaking the promise to Him, that was as bad as it got. So I made Him another promise that night, that I would never drink again. I've kept that promise. Come July 2nd, it'll be 39 years. I quit my job at the bar, became a stay-at-home mom, and Bob and I got married a couple of months later in Pennsylvania in a father and son double wedding. We continued to take the kids to therapy for a while, and Bob had stepped into the role of father with love and patience. Now they were helping him to fill the void in his heart that his daughter had left. Jamie quickly became a daddy's girl, and David worshiped him, though he could never express his feelings, and he had lingering behavior problems that would cause discord between them. I got pregnant the following year, and y'all do remember I had my tubes tied after Jamie was born. But we were on cloud 9 and thrilled to welcome our son Robbie in January of 1989. Excuse me. I lost my place. We learned about this we learned about this time we had orders for Germany, so we rented out the house. Okay, something messed up here. All right, yeah, and he was born. Shortly after that, we had orders for Germany, so we rented out the house, and Bob flew to his new duty station. We had just learned that I was pregnant again. If anyone ever tells you that you can't get pregnant while you're nursing, don't believe them. It's a lie. The kids and I moved in with my mother once again, who by now was sober and retired. My mom and I were able to develop a strong connection and enjoyed our time together. I flew to Germany the day before Thanksgiving and the very last day I could safely fly. I was late in my 7th month, and Bob walked right past me at the airport, straight to the kids, and asked, where's Mother? It's not exactly the welcome you want after your husband hadn't seen in 6 months. We went to our not yet furnished quarters. He handed me an international driver's handbook and told me I had to get my license in 2 days because he was leaving for the field, and I needed to be able to go get mail, groceries, and register the kids for school, and none of them were in walking distance. Challenge accepted. Our son Jesse joined our family in January of 1990. At the same time, our household goods arrived. Later that year, we learned that I was pregnant again. I was shocked and upset and told God I could not do 3 in diapers. God has a sense of humor, though, and we learned it was twins the day before Bob was deployed for Saudi for Operation Desert Shield. 4 in diapers. It was the last time, and I mean last time, I ever told God what I couldn't do. Lesson learned. So here we are, No family around. Everyone's husbands are deployed. It's a recipe for friendships that develop quickly and last a lifetime. Because I am the fixer of all problems, I became a wife everyone turned to handle the many difficulties that arose during a very stressful time. On January 15th, I had what I call my hell day. It started out with a routine visit to my OB doctor, who informed me that after an ultrasound that there was a problem and that if I wasn't hospitalized, me and the babies were all going to die. I told him I had 4 kids at home, 2 of them babies, no one to care for them. Staying at the hospital was not an option. They sent me to the Red Cross, where I told them what the doctor said. They said they would have to verify everything before they'd notify me, and they'd get back with me. I went home and learned my 13-year-old son had been pulled off a bridge ledge just as he was ready to jump. He was convinced his daddy was going to die in a war. God put my upstairs neighbor where he needed her to be. She stopped her car in the middle of the Autobahn and ran and pulled him off the bridge. I will forever be grateful to her and to God. So now me and my babies are in danger. My son is suicidal, and the answering I'm getting from the command are that there's a problem with all the kids and the schools will deal with it. And if my day hadn't been bad enough already, late that night, armed guards are unloading by truckloads out in front of our building. The TV went dark, and the first bombs of Operation Desert Storm were dropped. Our husbands were now in a war zone. The next couple of days were utter chaos as my phone rang constantly with questions from wives, and no one had answers. When Bob finally called me on the 4th day, he was shocked to hear what the doctors had told me. You see, someone had told him that I had had the babies and we were all fine. Well, I called Red Cross, and I wasn't real polite. They assured me that that was not the message they had sent and they would investigate. And that's the one thing you don't do with the military, is mess with a Red Cross message. One of my friends I had made recently, quit her job and told me she would take care of my children. I called the hospital and told my doctor I would come in, and then I was informed that the hospital was closed for their wartime mission, and I was on my own. I went into labor that night, no shock. And my friend took me to the German hospital. They knocked me out and had to have my friend drive all the way to Frankfurt to get my medical records so they'd know what was going on. They were able to stop the labor, and a couple of days later I was told that Bob was on his way back. But God. He corrected whatever the other doctor had seen because I was able to carry the twins all 40 weeks. Now we had 4 in diapers, and life was never the same. When I tell you sometimes it took 4 hours to cook Hamburger Helper, it's no joke. But we managed, and I wouldn't change anything. My husband and my children became my whole world. We moved back to North Carolina, sold our 3-bedroom house that we'd outgrown, and bought an old Victorian farmhouse out in the country. Bob retired from the Army and began another career with the county. I continued to make the kids the center of my universe. There was always a problem to fix or a battle to be fought. School systems, learning disabilities, PTAs, fundraising. Life stayed busy, but with 6 kids, 6 different personalities, each had their own challenges. I would pray, Lord, help me help them. David spiraled when he was a teenager, and we made the decision to put him in a group home, then therapy, then more group homes. I'm telling you, nothing prepares you to see your child stab themselves right in front of you. But you do what you think is right, and you keep going, always praying, Lord, help me help him. Every time something happened, I would feel like God was still punishing me for that promise I had broke. David left home, joined the Navy, and my next hell day came in October of my daughter's senior year. I received a phone call early one morning that my sister, her husband, and their 5-year-old son had all been killed by a drunk driver. God showed up in so many ways during the next few weeks. I could spend an hour telling you all the ways. He was there, but believe me, he was there with me everywhere I turned. Then we lost Bob's dad unexpectedly 2 weeks later. And of course, during those 2 weeks in between, both our vehicles broke down, my washer, then my dryer went out. You know, the devil will play havoc. But God was still with us, and as always, he made a way. Excuse me. I really don't remember much about the months following as grief and depression moved in and stayed. My next real memories were shortly before her graduation. That following year was one of the toughest on our marriage. It was when I finally remembered to pray that I started to come out of the darkness that I'd been living in. Jamie went off to college, and I threw myself into whatever kept me busy. We still had 4 young boys at home, and life was never dull. Scouts, football, baseball, theater, tennis, and let's not forget band. We also dealt with anxiety, anger, and mental health disorders. There was never a shortage of things that needed fixing by me. But as they grew up, their need of me grew less and less. I was just a taxi driver. Bob and I would head in different directions because Robbie had to be in Pembroke, Russell had to be in St. Paul's at the same time. Then Jesse needed to be picked up and Randall dropped off. You guys know that routine. When they were all in high school, Bob convinced me I needed to take the basic EMT class he had just taken. So at 45 years old, I went back to school. I joined the local rescue squad, got my EMT certification, then went on to intermediate EMT, or advanced as they call it now. I loved helping others in their time of need, and for a person who needed to fix things, I had hit the mother load. I eventually went on to paramedic school and sat for my state boards the day before my 53rd birthday. I had become the commander of the rescue squad, but everything got put on hold when Bob was diagnosed with stage 3 throat cancer. He became my only patient, and though I could feed him through his peg tube, I could only be by his side as he went through this battle. We prayed, and the good Lord answered when he was finally declared cancer-free. Bob had been going to church at Freedom Biker Church, and I would go sometimes, but it just never felt like home for me yet like it did for him. He eventually began a program called Celebrate Recovery and began attending regularly. I was loving the changes I saw in him, and though I would attend once in a while, I was content to enjoy the changes I was seeing in him. I mean, I'd been trying to fix him for years with no success. Recovery was his thing. EMS was mine. The kids are grown now, but still each dealing with their own struggles. David was in and out of addiction, though for a long time we didn't know it was drugs. Jesse had joined the Air Force, gotten married, and had a child. Seeing your kid go off to war is no easy thing, and the man that returned was not the man that had left. Robbie went off to college, and Randall and Russell each fought their own demons. We tried to help wherever we could, but they had made their own choices. As time went on, David cut off all contact with us. Jamie, who had married and given us our first 2 grandchildren, would try and help him, but he eventually cut her off too. Then one evening I got a call from Jesse, who had been battling addiction for years, and he said, "Mom, I need help." I told him I didn't know how, but I knew where we could go and where there were people that did. You see, Bob was giving his testimony that night right here at Aaron Lake's Celebrate Recovery. We showed up. There were indeed people that surrounded Jesse and let him know that hope was real. And I was surrounded with the women who loved on me and reassured this mama that we were not alone. I got to hear my husband's testimony, and Jesse and I kept coming back. It didn't take me long to realize I needed recovery as much as Jesse did, if not more. He went on to treatment, and Bob and I kept coming back. By this time, Bob is very much involved with Broken Chains and CR, but it was all new to me. I went with him to Temple one time, and John Eklund was talking about codependency. I had never even heard the word before, but I knew he was describing me to a T. You know, that capital T for Terry. When I did my first step study, I realized I had been carrying the guilt of my broken promise for over 30 years because I had never forgiven myself. I had been able to forgive everyone else, just not myself. It affected everything I did and every decision I made, even how I prayed. When I was able to look in the mirror and apologize, it was like the weight of the world had been lifted. It was a freedom I can't describe, and a peace that defies all understanding. If you don't get anything else from my story, please get this. God can't forgive you if you can't forgive others, and this includes yourself. When Aaron Lake started talking about changing to another recovery program, I was the doubtful one, and Amy decided that me and Joyce, who had never done any 12-step, should be the beta testers for Recovery Alive's process group. We agreed, and I think I called Amy before we'd even finished step 2 and told her it was awesome. And by the time we got to chapter 7, we both told her this book was life-changing. This process taught me the power of complete surrender. That mom who had to fix things had finally learned to get out of the way and let God do the fixing. I laid my children at the foot of the cross, and I left them there. I prayed for them, but it was a constant reminder I had to tell myself that I had given them to Him, and I could trust Him completely with their lives. My life verse is Philippians 4, 6 and 7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Jesus Christ. God showed me what He could do when you give it all to Him. After 4 years of not knowing where my oldest child was, I got a letter from him telling me that he was in jail. Those first letters were full of anger, bitterness, and the drawings he sent were dark and menacing. I could not bring myself to write him back. I would just send him a care package every month. As the months passed, the tone of his letters changed, and God began to show up in his letters. He'd ask questions about things he'd read in the Bible. I just continued to trust God. He called me for the first time when he was being released from Wake County and being transferred to Johnson County to answer questions there. It was the first time I had heard his voice in over 5 years. Then he would call me on Monday nights once he got to Johnson County. We'd just be getting home from Recovery Alive. When David asked if he could come home when he was released, Bob and I were hesitant. We prayed about it and decided to treat him like anyone else coming into recovery. We would love him and introduce him to RA. Our RA family welcomed him, and a couple of weeks later, he met the national team when Aaron Lakes hosted the Recovery Con. God began to rock his world. But that's not my story to tell. But if you come back in 2 weeks, you can hear his story when he's the one standing up here telling you what God has done for him. And our son Jesse, who has struggled with relapse, is close. He's one step away from finishing his very first process group. I'm so proud of you. Maybe one day soon we'll get to hear his story. And that's the power of surrender, total surrender. Recovery has become a lifestyle for both Bob and I. Our marriage is stronger. Our walk with God has changed. I've relied on God my whole life, and He has answered so many prayers. I mean, you think about it, raising 6 kids on a single income, if that's not miraculous, I don't know what is. I don't know, but now, instead of just praying when things are tough, I pray about everything. I talk to him throughout the day. Though I still struggle with those feelings of wanting to fix things, I tell myself constantly that God is in control and I don't need to interfere. Bob and I finally found a church home here at Aaron Lakes where we both feel at home. We continue to live in recovery as it's our way of life. I encourage each of you to lay your hurts at the foot of the cross and surrender them to God. Then trust in His time, not ours. He will make all things right. I know because we're the proof that God is still in the miracle business. And many of you in here tonight have walked that journey with us. And I'm so grateful to each and every one of you. And I love you dearly. Thank you for letting me share.